were so committed to censoring innocent people.
Order. Bring in the defendant. Mr. Greg Groomer Onision, you are here today on trial for crimes against literature. Against these accusations, you have pleaded not guilty. Order. After weeks of trial, of statements, interviews and deliberations, all the evidence has been compiled and sent to the jury. I have here in my paw a video of the jury's detailed analysis of all the evidence of Mr. Onison's trial and their verdict on whether you stand guilty. Greg Groomer Onision, have you anything to say before we proceed?
Oh, I'm sorry. The cops are all about Onion Boy because turns out didn't break a single law.
Bring out the TV on a stand with wheels.
So you see, I didn't actually kill him, but I was holding the dildo, so it looked like... Oh shit, we're on. Greetings, humanoid figures. I am Moocake, and this is Tyrone the T-Rex. And today, we stand before you, faced with a monumental task. You see, back in 2016, back in the leafy kind of days of YouTube, there was a very infamous clickbait title that edgy commentary channels would sometimes use. The Hitler of YouTube. Various content creators over the years have been referred to as the Hitler of YouTube. Keemstar, FouseyTube, even Leafy himself. However, if there is one YouTuber that actually deserves that title, it is Onision. Greg Groomer Onision. The man with his name on a long list of disgusting and despicable things he's done. The most recent of which, grooming a child. I have made videos discussing some of these terrible things. If you go to the YouTube search bar, there are hundreds of videos detailing the many horrid things he's done. But we're not here to talk about those today. Today we are faced with a much darker and more difficult task. You see, Onision, he's written a book. In fact, he's written 3 books. I call them books. They read more like fan fictions. Poorly written fan fictions from edgy 14-year-olds.
This person says I need to be on an FBI watch list or in a padded cell.
Probably worth mentioning as well, Onision did not get these books published. He has self-published them onto the internet. Now that's a very big difference to actually getting your book published by an official publishing house. So why did Onision decide to self-publish these books? Why didn't he get them published normally? Well, that's because he's a terrible writer. He cannot write for shit. These books have no structure, no plots, no characterization. There are basic spelling and grammar mistakes in these books. That's how bad they are. Any publishing house with half a brainstem would not even consider publishing any of Onision's works. I'm willing to bet he tried. I'm willing to bet he genuinely tried to get these books officially published. Obviously no one would, so eventually he probably just gave up and published them himself on the internet. And because Onision had to self-publish these books, it means they're very easy to find. No joke, it took me one Google search and about 30 seconds worth of browsing to find 3 PDFs of all 3 books. Officially, Onision asks you to pay for these books. Fuck off. No way in hell, ever. First off, Onision is a terrible, terrible human being. He is an awful person, and I don't want even a penny of my money ever going his way. Ever. Number 2, even if a nicer person than Onision wrote these books, they're still awful. They're still written worse than some fan fictions. I'm not paying for that. It's crap. Basically, if you were to try and summarize these 3 books down into a single sentence, deluded and plotless fan fictions Onision has written about himself. So the first book, Onision's first deadly sin against humanity, is called Stones to Abbigale. It was released in 2015, I think. It is 90 pages long. That makes it the shortest of Onision's Holy Trinity. I have here written in my notes, it's 2/3 badly written teen high school romance and 1/3 Onision-themed acid trips. Sounds fucking great. So the main character of this story is this emo teenage know-it-all called James. However, James is quite clearly a self-insert of Onision. And so for that reason, I am going to be referring to James as Onision.
It's quite clear that the author did not care one bit how disturbing or how disgusting his self-insert came across.
Onision, in this book, much like real life, is a massive fucking narcissist. For as long as I remember, I've enjoyed seeing how people move around and talk to each other like they're animals at the zoo. I would try to deliver a more accurate analogy if I felt there was one, but so many of them seemed incredibly unaware of themselves, just living life as if they were some generic, predefined routine. Already, there's no sentence structure. This is page 3. There's no sentence structure at all.
From the first page onward, he describes anything and everything with an utmost arrogance and conceit that is nearly impossible to want to hear another word out of this kid.
Basically, Onision hates absolutely everyone and absolutely everything. Big shock. What a surprise.
His philosophy is that of an angry, edgy 17-year-old. Read this book if you want to remember that one arrogant kid from high school and you know you wish you could have punched.
In fact, the only thing he doesn't despise is this girl called Abby. Abby is, of course, the teenage heartthrob. There's always a teenage heartthrob in Onision books. There's just some weird, characterless woman for him to obsess over. Now, the big problem with Abby is she's written like a brick wall with a tragic backstory. She has no character, no opinions, no personality of her own. She is literally just Onision's object for the book.
His philosophy is that of an angry, edgy 17-year-old.
Now, Onision and Abby, quite coincidentally, have an art class together. It's the only class they share, and one day in art class, Abby decides to choose Onision as a partner over some bully twat. I can't even remember his name. It doesn't even matter anyway. Most of this book is completely unimportant. So this bully guy is called Jason, and basically I've described him as every stereotypical American bully from any cartoon ever. Jason is basically just an extreme, over-the-top cliche, and that's how Onision writes most of his characters in all of his books. They all seem really over-the-top, incompetent cliches. Like, for example, his art teacher. She is a borderline abusive old woman. She is confronted with one of her students pissing into a jam jar in her class, and instead of being like a responsible adult and doing her job, she just takes the piss of him. So at the end of their art class, Abby leaves Onision a weird, cryptic note for him to decipher. You know, because texting people isn't a thing. And Onision, like the good little simp that he is, picks it up and rushes on his way home to decrypt the message. However, on the way home, we're introduced to Davis. This is Onision's best friend in the story. His only purpose is to kiss Onision's ass. He just glorifies him and jerks him off and boosts his ego. That's all Davis does for this entire book. He's really annoying. Think of Davis as a retarded Watson to Onision's unintelligent, abusive, and equally retarded Holmes. So as Onision is speaking with Davis, he spies Abby in the distance, he starts stimping, and then he sees Abby kiss her boyfriend. Suddenly, Onision's world tumbles around him in fire and brimstone. His world is crushed. He feels absolutely distraught. Then Onision decides to throw himself a little pity party. He gets very sorry for himself because... what's her fucking name again? Abby. That's it. He throws himself a pity party because Abby has a boyfriend. Sorry, there's a lot of characterless women written in Onision's books. They all just blend into one after a while. You'll see what I mean. But yeah, Onision throws himself a pity party. He does a lot of this in the books. And Davis, his creepy weird friend, comes along to try and cheer him up. Davis could see my upset posture out his window as the bus pulled up. So as I walked up the steps this time, he screamed, "I love you so much, I wish you were my boyfriend." It's a funny catchphrase, bruh. Where'd you learn it? Now, to me, Davis reads like either a weirdly obsessed stalker or a closet gay that's as obsessed with Onision as Onision is with Abby. In fact, he might be both. You can tell that Onision tried to write Davis as like a fun, quirky, catchphrase quipping sidekick to Onision, and he fails dramatically. Davis just sounds insane. Then he goes home and just solves her cryptic note anyway, and it turns out to be her phone number. You could have just left him your phone number. So they call briefly, they talk about their art project or something important shit like that, and then he's just fine. There's no kind of suspense, there's no kind of repercussion, it's just, oh no, she's got a boyfriend, but it's fine now, she likes me. So if you haven't already guessed, most of this book is just padding and filler. All of Onision's books are mostly just padding and filler. A lot of the things he talks about in the books never go anywhere. They're not of any kind of importance or consequence on the plot, if these things even have plots. And this is especially true at the start of the books. There's a lot of just unimportant shit. So I'm trying to focus on the bits that are just important here, but honestly, it's really hard to tell what's important to the plot and what isn't, because most of Onision's books end up completely batshit crazy by the end and sound totally different to the start. So the next day in school, Onision and Abby's boyfriend have a standoff. It's like the Wild West, if the Wild West was bollocks. Obviously, Onision is a massive narcissist, so he can't do no wrong in these books. So what happens is Abby's boyfriend Ash turns out to be a real petty, simp, incel kind of a character, while Onion portrays himself as some sort of manly hero that's confident and cool and sticking up for women.
And who's that? Oh, it's Mr. MVP! Simp!
It's poorly written garbage, but it results in Abby breaking up with her boyfriend. Big shock. Onion has now got a chance at getting some pussy. So Abby and Onision walk home together in the rain, you know, as if you couldn't get any more cliche than that. It's just disgusting, to be honest. I hate romantic comedies and romance novels in general, but God, at least they're competently written. We stood in the rain for only a few seconds before she asked, "Do you think makeup really helps anyone?" I replied, still looking at her bag. "I think it helps us forget what we don't want to remember. It lets us pretend we're a little more perfect than we really are. If you need a break to vomit, I don't blame you." So now that Abby is, you know, single and on the market again, Onision is absolutely desperate to win her heart, and his first step in doing that is by writing her an email. Again, why does no one in this book just text like a normal person would? He sends his email, he goes to bed, he goes to school the next day, and he goes to his art class ready to do his project with Abby, and he discovers that she's not in class. She's also left him, get this, another cryptic note on her empty desk. Like, why does no one just... Oh, what's the fucking point? So he deciphers this second cryptic note, and it tells Onision to meet Abby at the church. That's probably a convenient spot for loads of pointless shit to go down. So he arrives at the church, and this entire scene is basically just an excuse for Abby to spew out a tragic backstory at the reader. At the end of it, Onision remarks that it makes him more attracted to her. He's just, you know, fetishizing abuse there. That's fine. We'll just look over that. It's perfectly fine. From here, there's a load of pointless exposition and filler scenes. Onision's mum introduces her boyfriend. Davis acts really weird again. You remember him? We couldn't go a few minutes without him being fucking weird. As I climbed on the bus the next day, Davis hollered, "Praise be to Onision. Our hero has arrived." I smiled as I always did. I hated loving his hilarious lines. What's funny about that? He just sounds like the obsessive fan from Oblivion.
Is there something you need? Can I carry your weapon? Shine your boots? Back rub, perhaps?
Simp!
Bye.
There is then a pointless dodgeball game. At the end of the dodgeball game, Abby comes up to Onision and kisses him on the cheek, and Onision appears to quite literally orgasm from this experience. Before Abby ran back to the locker room, she walked up to me and said, "Can you call me tonight?" I nodded, smiling, and she kissed me on the cheek. My mind exploded with excitement. From that single kiss on my cheek, my whole body felt light and warm for the rest of the day.
Simp!
You are an incel.
The relationship that James and Abby develop in this story is not what I would call healthy.
So Onision dutifully rings Abby. They have a brief phone call. It's really sappy and pointless and shit. I'm not even going to bother looking at it for this. By this point in the book, Abby and Onision seem to be officially boyfriend and girlfriend. Like, it's never made clear when that happens, but by this point, you know, it's just kind of noticeable. The next day, Onision comes downstairs for breakfast to find his mum announces that she wants to move in with her new boyfriend, which means that he would move away from Abby. This is terrible. Onision throws himself yet another pity party because it's so sad and his life is so hard. Please, everyone, simp over Onision. His life is so hard. He mopes around for a little while. Abby and him get kind of sad and sappy about the whole thing. David acts like a fucking creep again. And then out of nowhere, there's a school shooting scene. He gets on the bus, he goes to school with Davis, he gets off the bus, he hears gunshots, he gets back on the bus goes to drive away, and then Onision somehow, with his 4K vision, spots that it's Abby's ex that's doing the school shoot-up. And so then, like any normal teenage boy would, he gets out of his seat, he goes up to the bus driver and he says, "Hey mister, let me off the bus." And the bus driver just fucking lets him go. Again, I have to reiterate, all adults in Onision's books are written like incompetent stereotypes. They have no kind of logic or intelligence. They are just massive cliches. So dear old Gregory runs back into the school like an intelligent boy that he is. Onision attempts to describe in words the ongoing chaos of a school shooting and fails horribly. And then Onision, in the book, comes across Jason, the weird school bully character from earlier. Remember the one that Abby nearly paired up with in art class? He is there beating the living shit out of Abby's ex-boyfriend. Like, just sitting on him, pummeling his face. Like, this man is nearly dead, and Jason is just screaming at him and showing no signs of stopping at all. And Onision looks at all this, regards it and goes, that's cool, and fucks off and looks for Abby.
This is by far the worst book I've ever read.
He finds Abby, she tells him what a big brave boy he's been for stupidly and needlessly putting himself in danger. Then his mum appears and says that she's proud he ran into danger. Fuck off. No sensible adult would ever say that. If I had a child that ran into that kind of danger, and I found out about it, I would absolutely bollock them. I would give them absolute hell until they realised how fucking stupid they'd been.
Abusive relationships and school shootings aren't plot bunnies you fool around with and use to get your characters to hook up.
Onision's mother just decides to let Abby stay over in his room for a night. Like, it's really long and boring and really disgustingly sappy. And also, like, what mother would actually allow two teenagers to... I mean, all the adults in this book are just written like they're brain dead. So after this, there's a shitload more exposition for a good chapter and a bit. There's only two things of actual importance that happen in amongst all this pointless exposition. First, we get a scene where we are shown that Abby has an abusive household. Instead of handling this very serious issue with any kind of grace or respect or decorum, Onision, much like with abuse earlier, just completely trivializes and fetishizes it for his weird, self-made fan fiction. It's really fucking disgusting, and it needs to stop. Sadly though, it doesn't. There's a lot of that in these three books. You just kind of have to get used to it. It just drives you mad after a while.
Abusive relationships and school shootings aren't plot bunnies.
The second important thing that happens, it is announced that the president will visit Onision's school because of the school shooting. As this book was written in 2015, I assume it's President Obama, but it's not really specified. Can you imagine Onision having an interaction with President Trump? So yeah, the president turns up, it's all very kind of somber and serious, and then of course, because Onision is a massive egomaniac, the president spots him in the crowd of children and goes, you are Gregory. I remember you from the news about the shooting. He congratulates Onision about being a brave little boy, spews a load of exposition about goodness or something. It's really shit. I don't really care. Now, after the president's big visit, Onision's mum announces that she's ready to move in with her new boyfriend. Onision's sister also expresses interest in moving along with them. However, Onision does not want to move from his current house because he wants to keep going to school with his lover, Abby. So he asks if he can just stay in the apartment himself. And his mum and stepdad are like, yeah, sure, that's fine. We'll just move to a completely new house and let you, a teenage child, live in this house on your own. We will pay for all your bills and your food and your school upbringing and all that kind of stuff. You can just live on your own. And then, as if that alone isn't unrealistic enough, Onision then asks if Abby can come and live with him. Because, you know, she's got an abusive household and she can't live at home. And his parents are just like, yeah, sure, let's not contact child support or anything like that. Let's just illegally adopt her and put her in a house alone with my horny, sexually repressed son. That's a great idea. So Abby and Onision are now conveniently living together. First night they're living together, Abby asks if Onision wants to sit in the bathroom while she showers. It turns out this is a very lazily written scene about self-harming. Onision basically has Abby in the shower and she starts kind of rambling about a tragic past. And then she jumps out of the shower completely naked and goes, look at my body, I'm covered in scars. This makes me awful and evil. And Onision trivializes and fetishizes this and then goes to her like the big alpha Chad that he is and comforts her. And, you know, she loves him so much. What a big fucking surprise. He's just a big pillock. He's just a big narcissistic pillock. And as if that's not bad enough, it's immediately followed by a poorly written and disgusting sex scene, which I'm not going to look at. We're imposing a rule at this point in the video. Any sex scenes I will not be reading. A, because they're not family friendly. B, because I don't need the experience of reading them again. You don't need that experience either. So the next day, in school, Abby decides to give Onision a letter. Within this letter, she describes how her ex-boyfriend Seth, the one that did the school shooting, raped her. In the space of about 50-60 pages, Onision has already trivialised and sexualised abusive home life, abuse victims, self-harm, and now rape. In one book, with one character. How much more fucked up can you get, to be honest? In response to this, Onision gets up, walks out of his class, walks into her class, grabs her, and just makes out with her. In front of all the students, in front of the teacher, while there's a class going on. And she's not pissed off by this either. Like, who does that for a start? But who isn't pissed off by that? Onision then weirdly and slightly creepily tells her that he forgives her. How can you forgive her for being... I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going down that rabbit hole. There is then a weird scene where Davis and Onision go for a drive together, and during this, Davis gets weirdly upset over the fact that Onision and Abby are together, further reinforcing in my mind that he is a psychotic closet gay. As we drove down the road, Davis asked me a lot of questions about Abby, like about how serious we were and if I thought she was the one. He then asked, but you don't ever think about other people romantically? I replied, no, she's literally the centre of my world, Davis. He looked really upset by this. I asked, you don't like Abby? And he replied, no, I like her just fine. You just cucked him. He was your weird, gay-for-you, in-the-closet, obsessed stalker fan, and you just ruined his world with a single sentence, you monster. So after this, there's a convenient winter break. Onision and Abby spend a Christmas holiday together for a couple of weeks, living alone in that flat. It's long, it's disgusting, it's sappily romantic. An entire chapter, basically, is dedicated to them just having sex all day. So I think we'll skip over all that. After the break, Onision comes back to school and decides that he hasn't jerked his own ego in quite a while. So conveniently, Jason, the old bully character, the one that beat the shit out of the school shooter, he gropes Abby and touches her hip without her consent. And of course, Abby is a woman and property of Onision. So Onision decides to beat the shit out of Jason for his heinous crime. So Onision confronts Jason and beats the holy fuck out of him and like 4 of his mates, single-handedly, with ease. For the entire of this book, Onision has depicted his character as a weedy, emo outsider. He's not particularly strong. He himself has been beaten up like 3 or 4 times over the course of this book. And yet suddenly, out of nowhere, for no explanation, he's Jackie Chan. Now here's where it gets a bit funky, right? So Onision, Abby, and Davis all decide to go for a drive. Now Onision makes it very clear that they're driving on a highway, like a big motorway with lots of fast cars. People should not go on this kind of road. And as they're driving along, they cross a bridge and they spot a man jump off the edge. There's no kind of build-up for this. There's no kind of subtle reference that this might happen. It just happens. They're driving along, laughing and chatting, and then some guy just jumps off a bridge. So Davis, being the clearly intelligent human that he is, stops the car, gets out of the car, and steps onto the extremely busy motorway. You know, the one that's, really busy, with loads of cars moving really fast? Steps out of the car, onto the motorway, goes to run towards where the man jumped from, and immediately gets hit by a car. Again, there's no build-up, it's just, oh no, a man jumped off a bridge. Quick, I'll get out the car. Gone. He's just dead in an instant. No kind of emotion, no kind of build-up, it's just, he's fucking dead now. Again, Onision made it very clear that they were driving on a busy motorway. Why the fuck would you just step out onto a busy motorway? Why was anyone surprised when a car absolutely decimated him? It's to be expected. He stepped onto a motorway.
If you want a book to attempt to invalidate your existence every other sentence, then by all means, buy this book.
So at Davis's funeral, his mother gets up to deliver a speech about his recently dead son. And halfway through this speech, she cuts off and spends the rest of it jerking Onision off. Just stroking his ego, just saying all sorts of wonderful shit about him at her son's funeral. And then, as if that wasn't a massive jerk off on its own, the next day Onision goes to school and the school nurse and one of his teachers pull him aside and go, hey, we think you should run for school president. Like, alright, we get it. Have you put enough cock up in your ass yet, Onision? Come on. Then suddenly Onision remembers that it's nearly the end of the book and something dramatic has to happen, so the very same school nurse that just recommended him for school president then immediately goes and accuses Abby of being responsible for the school shooting. You couldn't make this shit up if you tried. The cops are called to evaluate this claim. They obviously completely shut it down because there's no proof at all that this was even a thing. And then later, at home with Onision, Abby, like most victims of trauma do, starts to blame herself. And like the rational and sane and alpha Chad man that Onision is, he doesn't go, oh, don't worry, it's fine, stop blaming yourself, you've done nothing wrong. He immediately goes, oh yeah, she must be right, it was her fault, and immediately gets really, really pissed off with Abby for apparently causing a school shooting. He, no word of a lie, goes and sulks in the shower for a while. Like, he turns the water on and sits hunched down in the shower with his clothes on, like a little emo bitch. And then after a brief pity party, he just decides to forgive Abby for whatever she did. And again, there's no repercussions, it's just, oh, I'm sad now. Oh, I forgive you. Oh, I'm now no longer sad. This is epic. And then immediately after forgiving Abby and basically pulling her into a cycle of playing victim, they have sex in the shower. There's just another disgusting sex scene. It's just, we're nearly there now. This is nearly the end of the first book. We're in the end game now, boys. So, the next day, Onision goes back to school, and the school nurse, right, who up until this point, she's been reasonably normal. Like, she's been just as retarded as all the other adult characters in Onision's book, but she's been no worse than them. Out of absolutely nowhere, she goes fucking nuts. Suddenly, this woman has got a vendetta against Abby for no reason. She abandons all professional and medical ethics and just runs around the school telling everyone she can that Abby caused the school shooting. You know, like a sensible school nurse slash therapist would. The principal then announces over the intercom that this is obviously bollocks, that no one should listen to the school nurse, she's telling complete lies. And then the principal proceeds to sack the school nurse. Now Moocake, I hear you thinking, this sounds normal. These adults sound like they're being sensible and doing sensible, normal things. It's not that, don't worry at all. In response to being fired for being a complete cunt, the school nurse sets the school on fire. And Onision and Abby run to the wreck of the school to look upon the damage that's been wrought. And Abby goes, oh my god, Onision, this is terrible. An entire public building that was recently shot up has just been burnt down. What are we gonna do? And Onision, I shit you not, no joke of a lie, finishes the book with this line. Well, I guess I'm not running for school president. You spent this entire book boosting your own ego, jerking yourself off, and trivializing things like suicide, rape, abusive households, arson, self-harming, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, it's a funny Seinfeld gag? What the fuck is wrong with you, Greg? But yeah, that's it. That's the end of the first book. It just ends completely suddenly, out of nowhere, with a cheesy one-liner. I've written in my notes, final verdict, 2 out of 10. Book is complete cancer, don't read it at all. Please, God, let me forget. I think, to be honest, that's about all you need to know. Should we fucking move on?
Mr. Greg Groomer Onision, so far, the evidence has not stacked in your favor. Have you anything to say before we continue?
I'm a banana! I'm a banana!
Let us proceed.
This is my vegetarian body!
Sorry about that, fellas. Had to take a quick interlude there to make some food and jump a couple dimensions to get some necessary goods. I don't think I'd survive the rest of this review without some help. You know what I mean? So next up on the itinerary, we have Book 2, This Is Why I Hate You. It was released in 2015, about 6 months after Stones to Abbigale was released. This man tried to churn out 2 books in the space of half a year, and it really does show. It stands at 136 pages, that makes it the longest of the Onision trilogy. It's also the one that I dread reading the most of the 3 books. Now, in my opinion, the second book is actually the most well-written of the trilogy. It's still really bad, it's still got poor grammar, spelling mistakes, virtually no plot or characterization. So it's still really shit, don't you fret, but of the 3 books, it's probably the most well written. However, it compensates for this by having a worse story than the first. In general, the overall reading experience for this book was really, really bad. Way worse than Stones to Abbigale. This one just goes off the fucking rails.
Laura says my book is laughable at best. This is by far the worst book I've ever read. In general, this book is horrendously written. I don't know how, but it managed to be simultaneously more boring, yet also more disturbing than the previous one. I wrote 2 books, but really the second book was me simply telling all you people to go fuck yourself.
So the main character of this book is called Arthur, but you guessed it, he's a very obvious self-insert for Onision. Again, I'm just going to refer to him as Onision. It's much easier.
The main character was such a narcissistic brat.
This book is supposed to be Onision's diary, and I've described it in my notes as a lucid shit stain Onision calls a book where his self-insert main character writes about how everyone is stupid and no one understands him. 80% of the book is him jerking himself off. He hates everything. Sounds like a fucking wild ride.
They say it's like an actual diary from a 6th grader. Oh, so you read a lot of 6th grader diaries? Hanging out with those 6th graders a lot, are we?
There's a brief introduction where Onision introduces himself, states that things like happiness and love are totally pointless, and then he shamelessly begs for his book to be published. I'm done talking for today. You know my name, you know my obvious pessimism and disdain for society. Most importantly, you know there's a good chance even if this book is someday published, even if you're its biggest fan, there are likely hundreds of ways in which I hate you. He's such a nice guy, isn't he? He's such a really nice fucking guy. Chapter 1. Onision tells us that life is completely pointless. He tells us he's thin, and that apparently makes him healthy. He hates his dad, A, because he's fat, and B, because he believes in God. Onision's a mega woke atheist in this book, by the way. He can't go very long without telling everyone that he's an atheist, and that he's very clever because he's an atheist. I myself am an atheist. I just don't feel the need to ram it down everyone's throat. Anyone being loud or obnoxious about their opinions, regardless of what they are, you need to stop. Fuck off. No one wants you here. Onision's dad just seems like a genuinely nice guy that's trying to help and better his clearly troubled son, but Onision's just like, nah, he's a dickhead. I wish he'd leave me alone and stop being nice to me. There is a reason why Onision is such an asshole towards his father. There's a big reveal later in the book. It's not very good. It's not clever. In fact, it's my least favourite thing about this piece of literature. Chapter 2. Onision has a dead mum in this book. Apparently she and ham sandwiches are the only 2 things that Onision doesn't despise. I'm not making that up. He tells us that sports are completely pointless and beneath him. Anyone that participates in sports is a complete idiot. Basically, Onision just is completely talentless. I thought that was quite obvious. He also likes to fantasize about murdering people. He goes into great detail multiple times in this book about how he loves to fantasize murdering about people. But that's okay, guys. He's not actually a sociopath because he'd never actually kill someone. He'd only think about it. He reveals in this chapter he's got a girlfriend called Ashley, but he makes it very clear that he's only with her because of the sex. He doesn't love her at all, he just wants sex. He then tells us that free will is a fabricated concept, it's not a real thing, and so therefore he can bone his girlfriend whenever he wants, regardless of what she says. He for some reason states that he wouldn't love the children he had with Ashley. Onision's a father, by the way. He wrote this book when he was a father. Finally, he finishes this chapter by telling us that he's going to beat the shit out of a generic bully character called John. He is this book's equivalent of what's his name again? I think it was Jason, or was it Seth? I don't remember at this point. Apparently this generic bully John touched his girlfriend's hips without his or her consent. That makes him scum, so Onision's going to beat the shit out of him. He tries to justify this by saying that he's aware that his feud doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. He's simply marking his territory as all primitive animals do. That's literally how he tries to justify this. Chapter 3. Onision beats up a load of bullies. Because he's an alpha male, guys. Remember that. He beats up like 4 or 5 people, just like in the last book. He smacks one of them in the throat, he breaks another one's arm, and he gets aroused by the snapping noise. The snap of his arm was rather loud. Surprisingly so. I might have just felt arousal from how tremendous it was. Right then. He's fucking nuts. Oh, God. This is only the 2nd book as well. Oh, I actually want to die. Apparently, Onision was taught to fight by his dead mother. Conveniently, she, just before dying, taught Onision basically how to smack the shit out of 6 people at once. The police then show up, they ask what happened. Onision claims it was self-defense, even though it wasn't, and they're in a crowded school, there are witnesses to attest to this. But they just let him off. They're like, oh, okay, cool, don't worry about it. I mean, you just broke some kid's arm, but it's fine. Be good next time. Chapter 4. Onision goes full incel. A lot of people wonder why girls like jerks. Why are a lot of women into guys with attitude problems over the friend-zoned nice boys? It baffles me that Onision would write that sentence, read it back to himself and go, yeah, that sounds good. That doesn't make me sound like a fucking nice guy at all. If you appreciate reality over fantasy, it takes one look at the animal kingdom to figure out why girls often choose to be with guys who are insensitive and domineering. In nature, the lion fights the hardest, the alpha male. Ah, fuck me. I've been memeing about that this whole video, but he's actually basically just called himself an alpha male. He gets super pissed off at his dad because his dad says, oh, you're struggling at school, I'll pray for you. You know, a nice gesture, even if you don't believe it'll do anything. He's not even struggling at school, he just can't be bothered, he's just fucking stupid. Onision then tells us that while his father is out visiting his girlfriend, Onision constantly masturbates in the house. He makes that very clear. As soon as his dad has left the house, he's just fapping straight away. This is all we learn in this chapter. That's it. He faps a lot, he doesn't like his dad, he's an alpha male. That's basically all he tells us. We are in chapter 4, and this book has derailed so much already. Chapter 5. Onision goes to school wearing a trench coat covered in blood with half his face painted like a skeleton. Every other person at school had been looking at me nervously for the past few days. Today, their looks could be in response to the fact I painted half my face like a skeleton. It could also be the fact that I wore the same trench coat I had on when I broke John's arm. I didn't even wash my own blood off it yet. Yeah, we get it. You're a big alpha male. Who cares, Onision? So, Onision gets called to the principal's office, obviously for dressing like a complete retard, and the principal just outright asks him, are you a psychopath? Like, again, just like the last book, all adults written in this book are just completely incompetent, over-the-top anime villains, basically. So, anyway, the principal then surmises that Onision is probably just being rebellious and stupid because his parents are rebellious and stupid. Why are his parents rebellious and stupid? Because they're religious, guys. That's the actual reason the principal gives. So, apparently he's a mega woke atheist as well. I don't care anymore. So the principal just self-diagnoses Onision as a psychopath and then expels him. There's no kind of deliberation, there's no kind of, I'll talk with the board. He's just like, yeah, you must be a psychopath. I hereby expel thee with my holy principal powers. Now, to be fair, Onision in this scene is dressed like a school shooter. Being sent home, being expelled, you can kind of understand it. And he even accepts this. However, he still gets very upset because he'd never actually do it, guys. He's only dressed up like one. He'd never actually hurt someone. It's like going through security at an airport with a gun and they stop you and they're like, hey, you've got a gun. And you're just like, oh yeah, but I wouldn't actually use it, so I'm just going to keep it. And they'd be like, yeah, fine. That's how the world works in Onision's mind. Anyway, Onision then goes and hangs out with his girlfriend and all her friends. He concludes that all of Ashley's friends are completely shit and recommends that Abby stop seeing them. Ashley gets quite annoyed by this and says no, so Onision throws a tantrum and goes home. However, of course, because this is an Onision book and logic doesn't exist, Ashley calls him later and is like, oh my god, I'm so sorry for having an opinion of my own. And Onision proclaims that the only way she will be forgiven is if she comes to school dressed like a goth. As the next day of school began, Ashley stood where she knew I'd see her as I walked in. Her hands were interlocked in front of her thighs. Her butt was slightly perked out. I noticed this because she was wearing black tights. As her eyes came clearly into view, I could see her purple eyeshadow, plum-covered lipstick. Again, it's just quite clearly fetishizing fan fiction he's written about himself. He just wants to get with some really young emo girl, and so he just writes a book about it, because he's a cuck. Chapter 6. Onision and Ashley have sex for the first time. Apparently they don't wear a condom. That makes it more romantic, according to Onision. Never found pregnancy scares romantic myself, but there we are. After having sex, suddenly Onision doesn't hate everything. Life suddenly has more meaning. You had sex, and it was your first time as well, so it was properly shit. And yet, despite this, Onision is now like, oh yeah, the world is great, maybe I can love people. Chapter 7. Onision gets annoyed with his dad again. This time, his dad announces that he's going on a road trip with his girlfriend. Obviously, as Onision is a child, he can't stay at home on his own, so he has to come along as well. And this interferes with Onision's life, because, you know, Onision's very important. He doesn't want to go on a road trip. He wants to have more sex with Ashley. So, In response, he starts blaring anti-religious music at them. He then insults them when they ask him to turn it down, like I think he calls his dad's girlfriend a whore or something, and so his dad just strangles him. Onision, in response, and I quote, kicks him 9 to 17 times to his chest, neck, and head. Where did this come from? How did this escalate so quickly? Why is everyone in this book written like a fucking muppet? The cops show up and arrest Onision, but his dad just seems to get off the hook. He doesn't have any kind of repercussions for strangling his son. He spends a weekend in juvenile detention, and because he's a big, epic emo, he prefers his quiet cell to his home life. What a surprise. And then he gets home and it's like nothing happened. Like there's no repercussions for the fact that he beat the shit out of his dad and got arrested. Things just go on as normal, as if nothing ever happened. Onion then announces that he hates his dad, and again, and that's the end of the chapter really. I don't care. Chapter 8. Greg reminds us that he has a lot of sex with Ashley now. So while Onision was away in juvenile detention, his dad managed to get hold of his laptop and read a load of his stuff, including this diary that he's apparently writing. And so obviously his dad has read that they had sex without a condom, and so quite understandably forbids Onision from seeing her again. I don't see anything wrong with that. Like, that's a pretty sensible decision made by an adult in this book for once. But of course, this just annoys Onision. He remarks about how much he hates his dad. He remarks how good sex with Ashley is. Apparently it's the only thing worth living for. He then foreshadows a big old tragic backstory because, you know, he hasn't thrown himself a pity party in a while. We'll get back to the tragic backstory later. Again, it's the thing I hate the most about this book. He then proceeds to spend the rest of this chapter shitting on vegetarianism.
This is my vegetarian body!
I don't want to eat fake cheese just because they want to. Try something different than cow pus dairy. Of course, something with a spine would object, so I did. What happens as a result? Insanity. Okay, I thought Onision was a vegetarian. Why are you shitting on vegetarianism here? My father didn't like the idea of me leaving the table without eating the meal. As I began to leave, he screamed out, "Call the cops," to his girlfriend. She immediately proceeded to the phone in the kitchen and began dialing. Yes, you heard that right. Onision refuses to eat peasant vegetarian food and literally gets arrested for it. So Onision throws himself a pity party. He remarks about how he hates his dad, dad's girlfriend, how the police are stupid, and then he decides that he's going to join the military because it's the only way to apparently escape this house. There isn't a bit in chapter 2 where he mentions that he might, or that he's always thought about it. No, suddenly he's just going to join the military. Out of nowhere. Chapter 9. Onision fucks off to the military. It just happens, he just gets accepted into the military and drafted away in like half a page. It's really shit. Not very much happens in this chapter. He just kind of describes his new base, the new people he's meeting. He describes his new sergeant, Sergeant Johnson. She is apparently abusive towards her troops and has large breasts. So obviously, Onision really wants to fuck her. He then spends the rest of the chapter reminding us that he's an alpha male. That's it. Chapter 10. Onision calls Ashley on the phone. He's been at this training camp for a while now. He hasn't seen Ashley in ages, so he decides to call her, and she just doesn't remember who he is. And then she does remember, and she's like, "Oh yes, Gregory, of course, it's you. How could I forget the big alpha male that took my virginity?" Because, you know, people talk like that in real life. Onision basically gets cucked by his girlfriend here. They then have a surprise hostage drill. Someone comes into their camp and pretends to take one of the trainees hostage. None of them do anything about it. They all just kind of stand there, completely taken aback. And Onision then reflects on this and calls himself a pussy, basically. First he gets cucked by his girlfriend, and then he cucks himself. All in one chapter. This is the kind of content I like. Chapter 11. Onision has found a new characterless love interest. Corey was a cute short girl with brown eyes and dyed blonde hair. She was discouraged by the military dress code for having dyed hair, but she clearly didn't care. Much like every other female character he's written, she has no character, no personality. She just kind of mindlessly adores Onision. There always has to be one. So Corey and Onision get talking. Apparently she only joined the military to pay for her college debts. Onision then concludes, quite intelligently, that he likes it here in the military because his dad is not here and because there are sexy women about. Chapter 12. Onision has some drama with a sergeant. He calls this sergeant out for apparently using degrading language with her troops, but then all the troops immediately side with the sergeant. So he's just sitting there, as Onision does, arguing with everyone else, insisting he's right, and so the sergeant pulls out the rulebook and proves him wrong. He still insists that he couldn't possibly be wrong because, you know, he is a literal god. And so his solution to all this is to just fantasize about murdering them all. Remember, he likes to fantasize about murdering people, guys? Yeah, everyone now doesn't like Onision, except of course for Corey. However then, conveniently, Onision just transfers to a new base and is loved by everyone again. Things just happen in this book. There's no build-up, there's no stakes, there's no repercussions. It's just, oh no, I am not liked. Oh good, I am now liked again. Chapter 13. Onision tells us that he likes to jack off a lot, thinking about Corey. Suddenly, Onision's this really nice, heroic character. Do you remember at the start of the book when he hated everything and despised all humans? That's just completely gone now. I probably don't need to point this out, but Onision has not done anything clever here. This is not like character development, it's not subtle. He doesn't slowly become a nicer person over the course of the book. He's suddenly just nice. One minute he hates everyone, the next minute he loves everyone. It's just shit. He spends the chapter complaining about various people, women, I think one of the sergeants. I don't really care, none of it's important. He then announces at the end of the chapter that he's going to get drafted to Korea, just out of nowhere. Alright, fine. Chapter 14. Corey and Onision have a conversation. Corey announces that she's being drafted abroad as well. Onision suggested that she goes for it as well, because hopefully they can end up in the same place and have some romantic, poorly written times together. Corey, however, is being drafted to a place called the Desert, which sounds a lot more dangerous and a lot more racist than Korea. Understandably, Corey is quite pissed about this. She only joined the military to pay for college, and suddenly she's being dropped in a war zone. But she doesn't seem to be annoyed with Onision at all. He's the one that caused this, but she still completely adores him unquestioningly. The two of them then watch a movie. Onision tries to kiss Corey. Corey won't let him kiss her, but still proclaims that she loves him. It's really weird. Onision then literally cries himself to sleep at being rejected by Corey. Despite her positive spin on what happened, I still took the rejection of being kissed to heart. I basically cried myself to sleep, which is something I don't ever remember doing over a girl. At least she loves me. I mean, you've written this to try and make yourself look like some tragic hero, you know, a bit of pity amongst the emo 14-year-olds that are actually reading this book seriously, but it just portrays you as a bit of a cuck. Big deal. She didn't kiss you. It doesn't matter. Get over it. Chapter 15. Onision gets an email from Ashley. So Onision decides to ring Ashley, and Ashley tells us that her brother is dead. We've never heard of this brother before. First thing we hear about him in this book, and the last thing as well, is that he's fucking dead. Onision is like, what? Really? How'd that happen? And Ashley blows up at him for not knowing about a school shooting that went on in their hometown while Onision was away in the military. What is it with this guy and fetishizing things like school shootings? Why are you obsessed with school shootings, my dude?
Abusive relationships and school shootings aren't plot bunnies you fool around with and use to get your characters to hook up.
Onision decides to fly home to see Ashley. Do you remember earlier in this book when Onision remarked that he has no feelings for Ashley? He is only with her for sex. That's the only reason they're together. Suddenly, he's done a 180 on this as well. He now really likes and misses Abby and really cares for her. Again, it's not clever kind of character development. He just conveniently misses her now for the sake of... I mean, is this even a fucking plot at this point? So Onision gets back to his hometown, he meets Ashley in the airport, they make out in the airport for a few minutes awkwardly, and from this, Onision somehow has an epiphany that love and relationships are great now. I really hate this book so much. If we didn't care about other people, if we didn't care about ourselves, many of us wouldn't want to survive. What would even be the point? Evolution must have created the concept of love. Our relationships with other human beings were biologically invented to get us to live on and multiply. Chapter 16. Onion arrives in Korea. Very little of interest happens at the start. He describes the new base. He describes another attractive sergeant. He describes what troops are doing. It's really mundane. The troops then do a challenge in which they have to fight a man in padded armor. And Onision specifies that this challenge is hand-to-hand combat only. You cannot use weapons at all. So no one can beat this guy, so Greg decides to have a turn at it. And at first he acts cocky and just doesn't fight back at all. And then he picks up like a stick and starts shoving it in between the gaps in this guy's armor. He then puts it through the guy's faceplate, gouging one of his eyes out. So I have here in my notes, the fight is over, he has won through cheating, he acknowledges this, and then just decides to keep going and breaks the guy's ankle. This gives him chills of satisfaction. He then suddenly remembers that breaking people's limbs for no reason is a bad thing to do and gets very sorry and throws himself a pity party. Bro, you just broke a man's ankle and you somehow still feel sorry for yourself? Fuck off. Chapter 17. Onision gets held accountable for being a twat. He tries to defend his extremely violent actions. His main kind of argument of defense is, oh, they can't kick me out the military for being too violent. He gets off completely scot-free, like he gets taken to the general or the major or whoever, and he's like, why did you do this? And he's like, I'm sorry. And they're like, oh, it's cool, don't worry. Everyone else in the base wants him gone, but they're just like, nah, it's fine, just leave him around. Just make sure he sees the therapist every now and then. Chapter 18. Onision, get this, likes another woman. This is the third one of the book now. There is Ashley, there is Corey, and there is now this girl called Rachel. Sorry, I had to literally read her name. Again, so many characterless women in these books, they all just amalgamate into one in my mind. So there's Ashley, who is basically never seen again for the rest of this book. There is Corey, who loves him but doesn't want to be physical with him. And now there's Rachel, who Onision basically only refers to in this book as Booty. Onision also tells us that she's not of his race. We did it, guys. Onision has ended racism with his weird fetish books. Suddenly the base starts encouraging Onision to be crazy violent, even though literally the last chapter he got in massive shit for being crazy violent. Do you remember anything that happened at the start of this book? At all? Remember when this book was a diary about an edgy 17-year-old with a vegetarian dad? No, I don't remember that either. So some other army person starts hitting on Rachel, or Booty, as we're now calling her. Onision, despite barely knowing this woman, and despite this woman barely knowing him, just proclaims himself as her boyfriend and beats the shit out of this guy. He then wakes up in hospital. Apparently he had a massive fight with this guy, and the colonel is standing over him. Now this is the same colonel that last chapter went, dude, you've got to stop being psycho-violent, right? It's really bad. And this colonel is now saying, oh great, well done for being psycho-violent. We need more of you guys in the army. So this colonel guy now completely loves Onision. Rachel now completely loves Onision as well for defending her from nothing. We're nearly there now. Chapter 19. Greg gets special treatment because he's a special boy. The colonel, who now loves Onision, decides to give him a load of special training. There is literally then a really poorly written Rocky montage, and he comes out of it as some sort of big buff alpha male Chad. So he goes to visit Booty in her new flat while they're on leave from the army, and her new flatmate is Corey. Now initially Onision shits himself at this news, but then it's just completely fine. Onision could obviously never be criticised because he's a massive narcissist, so it's absolutely fine within 2 sentences of it being revealed. Corey even encourages him to keep sleeping with Booty, even though apparently she loves him. I really don't know. It's just getting vaguely three-way-ish at this point. Booty, also, by the way, is a vegan. And seeing as Onision's new love interest is a vegan, he now loves vegetarianism and veganism, even though he spent this entire book shitting all over those concepts. It's like he had 3 terrible ideas and just kind of fucked them all together in the hope of making a book. Didn't work, did it, mate? Chapter 20. Onision decides to sign up to be drafted again. Onision this time is not sent to Korea, he's sent to the desert as well. He vomits on the plane over. Just so bad, isn't it? It's just really fucking bad. Vomits on the plane over, please feel sorry for me. He then spends 2 weeks in the infamously racist desert. He has a really crap time there. All he does is complain about it there. He throws himself a pity party for a couple of pages, and then just returns back to his previous base like nothing happened. He meets up with Corey and Booty, and they, after not seeing him for weeks, come up to him and say, hey, do you want to have a threesome? Just kidding, we'd never do that, but we are kind of gay for each other. Greg is hurt and betrayed at first, but then Booty is like, nah bruh, it doesn't count, it's with a girl. He's now fine with it, he leaves, and they start making out. I don't even remember writing this. Chapter 21. Onision is now in a polyamorous relationship. I wonder where he got the inspiration for this idea. Onision basically uses this chapter to kind of pander towards gay people for a while. You know, he wants the attention. Any kind of love and praise and sympathy he can get from anyone will do. So he just panders at gay people really poorly for a little while. He also remarks that he constantly likes to watch Booty and Corey having sex, and Corey enjoys watching him and Booty having sex. Just in case you forgot, Onision's an alpha Chad. He's just reminding you of that, guys. It's very important that he reminds you that he's an alpha fucking male. So the guy that Onision nearly killed, remember the one that he gouged his eye out with a fucking stick? Anyway, he reports to the military base that Corey's gay. And at the moment, according to Onision, the base has got a don't ask, don't tell kind of policy. So apparently it's quite a serious threat. Onision panders some more about gay people and then breaks narrative to remind us that he's in shape. Just a side note, you might think I'm horribly fat from eating all this meat. It's not true. I weigh 178 pounds and I'm just an inch shy of 6 feet tall. Some people, like my dad, will have you believe that if you eat meat, that means you'll be obese. That's not always true. Bruh, I made a really nice fry-up a few minutes ago. Do I look fat to you? I just can't believe that Onision would break off what little flow he has in this book to remind us that he's in shape and that fat people are bad. He's just so fucking brain dead. Chapter 22. Corey is now being discharged from the army for being gay. Apparently she's not only being discharged because she's gay, but also because a load of the trainees at this camp don't like her for some reason. It's never been announced before, they just suddenly don't like her. So they've made up a load of stories about her, they've presented these to the Colonel as well, and the Colonel has decided to kick her out, even though he didn't kick Onision out for being a complete psychopath a few chapters. But it doesn't matter, don't get bogged down on it, there's no point. So a load of people have made up some horrible stories about one of Onision's women. What do you think he decides to do next? Do you think that A, he will try to talk to them and gain their support and talk them down? Do you think B, that he will open up the heavens upon them and announce that he is Jesus? Or do you think C, he'll beat the shit out of them? If you guessed C, you win a prize. Prizes, I don't fucking know. Not these books, I hope. So Onision busts down these guys' doors, he puts a knife to one of their throats and goes, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And the guy's response is, nah bruh, you're not gonna kill me and there's nothing you can do. Upon hearing that, Onision's just like, oh yeah, you're right, oh shit. And just gives up and goes back to his room and cries himself to sleep. It's the most anticlimactic thing ever. Yeah, I'm gonna beat all these guys up. Yeah, I've got a knife to your throat. Oh wait, there's no point, never mind, let's just go home. Chapter 23. Greg does not get reported to the Colonel for holding another man at knife point. This is apparently because the Colonel loves Onision so much he wouldn't believe anything negative said about Onision. What a fucking surprise. Greg just wants to leave the army at this point and be with Corey and Booty, his two women. So they hatch a plan for Corey and Onision to get married so that they can keep this weird little threesome going. While they're doing this, the guy with one eye attacks them again. Apparently he's got some sort of vendetta against Onision now. Like, I get that Onision stabbed your eye out, I can understand that. But for some reason now, his only goal in life is to just ruin everything Onision has. So one of One-Eyed Pirate Man's friends distracts Onision, he fucks off, and the other lot come into the room and start attacking the women. Onision comes back to the room and, like the big alpha he is, knocks the shit out of all of them. He stabs the one-eyed guy in his other eye, proving that he's a massive Chad. This man is now completely blind and on the floor screaming. And yet, despite this, he gets up as if nothing happened and stabs Onision in the back of the head. This man cannot see. This man is in great pain from just having a knife put in his skull for the second time, and yet he gets up perfectly fine and stabs Onision in the back of the head. Okay, I don't care. This is... The book's nearly over now. Who gives a fuck if it makes any sense? Chapter 24. Greg has died of his wounds. Praise be to the gods. This final chapter is written like post-mortem by Corey. She basically spent the whole of the chapter just jerking Onision off, how great he was, how kind he was, how much he respected women. And then out of nowhere, Corey just reveals that Onision's dad was really abusive to him when he was a child. This is apparently why Onision was so mean and rude to his dad for the whole of the book, but it feels like such a fucking cop-out. For the whole book, you never really alluded to the fact that there might be abuse or whatever going on here. He suddenly just is. For the convenience of, we can't have Onision looking bad, there has to be a reason he's such a twat to this other person. Again, it just trivializes abuse, and that's all he does in these books. He trivializes disgusting, horrible things for the sake of his weird, fetish fanfictions about himself. He needs to fuck off. I really, really despise Onision, in case you can't tell. And that's it. That's the end of the book. It just abruptly ends there. Oh yeah, Onision's died. We loved him so much. His dad was a prick. The end. That's the end of the entire book. Final verdict, worse than the first book. 1 out of 10. Awful plot, 0 structure. Such a dragging experience overall. Why did I subject myself to these books? I mean, I really don't know, to be honest.
This strange man that we watch, what do we know about him?
Our sources tell us his name is Moocake. He spends his days hopping dimensions and talking shit about awful YouTubers with a dinosaur called Tyrone.
Interesting. He may be of use to our cause. Once we are finished with Greg Groomer Onision, we shall look into this creature further. For now, let us continue.
Right. We're nearly there now. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Let's fucking do this. So, the third and final book of the Onision trilogy is called Reaper's Creek, which immediately gave me Alabama vibes. It stands at 103 pages long, it was released in 2018, and as of now, it is the latest book Onision has written. Hopefully, it's the last book he ever writes, because this one somehow manages to be even worse than the last two. It's got the really bad writing of Stones to Abbigale, with the lucid absurdity of This Is Why I Hate You, and it takes these two already terrible concepts, fucks them together, and comes out with a book that's somehow even worse than the previous two. I've summarised it in my notes as a fever dream and a night terror have a child together. This book is what comes out. Let's just get into it, shall we?
I should be emotionally more mature than this by now, but for some reason I'm not.
Before you read this book, I want you to understand something. All of my books, Stone to Abbigale, This Is Why I Hate You, and now Reaper's Creek, they are not works of pure fiction. These are stories from my own life mixed with my imagination. What a dark fucking crevice your imagination is, Greg. Many of the things told in these stories reflect on who I really was, what actually happened, and what was going in my mind. Stones to Abbigale represented a better version of myself. That's not particularly flattering, is it? This Is Why I Hate You represented the darker version of myself. Various aspects of that book were delivered from my actual life too, but this book is simply myself, who I was both good and bad during the time this story takes place. As you read, I'll leave it up to you to decide what events really happened and what is a product of creativity. I wouldn't call any of your books a product of creativity, to be honest. I'd call them fucking monsters. Chapter 1. The shit show begins. I was home finally. My father had taken me so many places when I was in Ohio.
But I'm from Ohio, though, white boy.
So it takes about 2 sentences before we've ticked off most of the Onision tropes. He hates religion, he's got deep-seated daddy issues, he fancies some emotionless brick wall of a woman. Already we're settling into the norms. Now the main character of this book is called Daniel. However, in the opening chapter, he accidentally just calls himself Greg. In my mind, this proves more than anything else just how brain-dead Onision actually is. He wrote this book. He, I hope, proofread it back, and he still didn't pick up on the fact that he calls his character Greg instead of Daniel. So either he just didn't bother reading it back because, you know, he couldn't possibly be criticised, or he did read it back and he's just really stupid. So Onision in this book is 11 years old, but don't worry guys, he's still very tall and has a sharp jawline. He makes sure to let us know that. Very little happens in the opening chapter. He gets back to his little house in a place called Reaper's Creek. He's been away with his dad, who is obviously separated from his mother for the summer. He finally gets back to Reaper's Creek. He settles back in. He likes his mum. He likes his stepdad. He's got a sister that he kind of likes. She's fat, you see, and fat people, as Onision will not stop telling us, are apparently the spawn of Satan. Greg helps his stepdad build a bed for his cousin, then fucks off up a hill. He has some weird fever dream, sees the face of a school bully called Philip, you know, there's always got to be one generic bully character, then faints and wakes up covered in blood. That's basically it for this chapter. I mean, Chapter 2. We're introduced to Onision's mother. She comes home, she says one line, and then she's basically never seen again for the entirety of this book. Are you surprised at this point? These books have got no kind of flow at all. Onion and his fat sister decide to go to his Uncle Matt's bonfire party. It's basically a lame excuse for Onision to get really anti-alcohol and anti-drugs. For some reason, his deluded, probably inbred family is all at this Uncle Matt's bonfire, and they all start trying to convince the 11-year-old Onision to drink whiskey, and he's like, nah bruh, don't want to. I don't need drink and drugs, because I'm high on life. Eventually, he has a bit of a tantrum, throws himself a pity party as per usual, and just fucks off home, because he was constantly being asked to drink alcohol. Gregory, just smoke a joint, chill out, it'll be fine. Also stop writing books. So Greg arrives home, goes to bed, and has another weird fever dream. And in this fever dream, he sees some weird alien creature, and he concludes, because he's a massive egomaniac, that this makes him special somehow. Alright, fuck it. Again, much like all of Onision's books, the beginnings are always really slow and filled with completely trivial information that has got nothing to do with the plot. So I'm just going to skim over this shit as quickly as I can. Trust me, the juicier stuff is yet to come. Chapter 3. Greg is awoken by his mother singing to her. He describes it as annoying and complains about his mother for a while. Again, what is it with parental figures being genuinely nice to Onision in his books and him just giving them shit for it? Anyway, he wakes up and he and his sister Joanna, not that her name really matters because we're not going to remember who the fuck she is by the end of this book, he and Joanna go to school. They arrive at the school bus stop. They meet with their cousin whose name is Michelle. Again, does it matter? She's never seen again for the rest of this book. The school bus arrives. Onision imagines the bus blowing up and violently killing everyone in the vicinity. Again, don't worry guys, he's not a sociopath. He'd never actually do it. He's just got an imagination. Onision gets to school and starts complaining that there's a girl called Heather that constantly won't stop hitting on it. Now, Onision doesn't like attention from Heather because she's ugly, despite the fact that she's blonde with blue eyes. Putting aside the whole Aryan race shit, which is already a massive red flag on its own, Onision is 11 in this book. What 11-year-old actually gives a shit about girls or relationships? When I was 11, the only thing I cared about was getting home from school to play Pokemon. In chapter 3, we're also introduced to Greg's friend character. He's called David. He's basically a carbon copy of Davis from Stones to Abbigale, if you remember him. He just exists to be really creepy and jerk Onision off. I saw your sister today, Daniel. She's hot, David belched. I replied, can you never say anything like that to me again, please? David again snorted, laughing. It was like the guy lived to trigger me. Bruh, I've been triggered. I've been triggered. This man, how dare he call my sister hot? She's not hot because she's fat. So he then goes to his science class, and in science they're watching a VHS about dinosaurs. I'm not entirely sure if that's science, but never mind. And in this VHS, the presenter asks, what if it were possible to combine a human with a dinosaur? Well, first off, it's not, right? All the dinosaurs are very much fucking dead. Second off, I don't think human gene splicing is a thing yet, and even if it is, it's definitely not, on the market. But anyway, this program's like, oh, what if we combine dinosaurs with humans? And Greg's like, that wouldn't be possible. And then the VHS shows a mock-up picture of what this dinosaur-human hybrid would be like. And get this, it looks exactly like the alien that Greg saw in his fever dream. He goes home, he tells his mother about the aliens at dinner, and then just concludes that the aliens are coming for him, because he's special and a massive narcissist. Also, everyone in this book is written like they're a robot. They've got no emotion when they speak. Somehow Onision's writing hasn't got better. It's gotten worse since his first book. Grammar, spelling, plot, general flow is worse than both the other books in this. The teacher showed me a picture of an alien on a video and I cried. My mum's face went from curious to angry. They showed you a scary alien? At your age? I replied. It had dark black eyes, scales. It had no nose, but it had tiny holes where its nose would be, and they said it was a dinosaur human, but it looked like an alien. Right, first off, that description just sounds like fucking Voldemort. Second off, why does everyone in this book sound like they're a text-to-speech app? No one's got any emotion, they just sound like fucking robots. Chapter 4. Onision has his friend David over to stay. Coincidentally, Onision's sister also brings a friend of hers over to stay. Greg, who is 11 years old, might I remind you, remarks that she's got massive breasts. And then they all decide to just get sleeping bags and sleep in the same room together, for no other convenience than plot. David could not stop obsessing over Mara and her giant breasts. After everyone turned out the lights, David began loudly building a plot to somehow get Mara and his lips to connect. David said, hey, dare me to kiss Mara to me? And I replied, David, no. He said again, more loudly, I'm going to go over there and kiss Mara on the lips. I replied, David, you need to stop being a pervert. Yet he did not listen. Giggling, he said, I want to kiss her on the lips. I'm going to do it. Mara then loudly said, excuse me? I immediately replied, David, you idiot. Okay, so A, Greg and David are both weird incel pervs in this. B, again, they just sound like robots. There is no emotion in this at all. So the next day, Onision and all his friends wake up, and as if nothing happened, they just go to school, even though David was a borderline pervert. But it's fine, guys. There's no stakes in any of these books. They go to school, and we're finally introduced to Philip, this book's generic bully character. Remember the one that Greg had a fever dream about in the first chapter? At recess that day, Philip, the school bully, was waiting for me on the playground. He had given me grief throughout the year, but none so great that it was a huge problem. He had curly blonde hair, completely random teeth as if God himself had thrown his teeth into his mouth like dice, shrugged, then walked away leaving them where they fell. And as far as Philip's height, he was about an inch shorter than me. What is Onision's obsession with height? Like, anyone shorter than him is just scum. I don't understand why he has to keep pointing out everyone's height in such great detail. And then after this brief introduction to Philip, we are then introduced to, you guessed it, another characterless woman for Onision to obsess over. Hell yeah! Walking past Philip as if he did not exist, I approached the girl and said, "Hi, I'm Daniel." The girl turned to me and replied, "I'm Aubrey." She was very short, had perfectly straight hair, and bangs cut somewhat like the Go Figure Beatles. I genuinely struggle to read this book because the sentence structure is complete bollocks. There's no kind of flow. You just kind of ramble through the book in a hope that you can understand it. So Onision then goes to class. Philip the bully acts like a dumbass in the class and calls the teacher the F word. I almost find it funny that Onision won't put the word fuck in his book, but he will blatantly trivialise and fetishize incredibly serious issues like, get your priorities straight, man, come on. And then finally he just goes home from school and has another weird fever dream about aliens. There's a lot of fever dreams in this book. You're just going to have to get used to that. Chapter 5. Onision goes to school again. All these books start exactly the same. It's just he goes to school. Something happens in school. Whatever that happens is of no impact on the plot. Onision then goes home. That's how, like, the first third of all of his books go. So he goes to class and he decides that he hasn't jerked himself off in a while. So some child just sneaks his way into his class and announces that he's getting bullied or he's going to get beaten up or something. I heard a whimpering in the back of the room. It seemed while I was lost in thought, a boy had slipped through the door. I asked, "What's the matter?" The boy responded, "The kids outside want to beat me up. They're looking for me." I replied, "Why are they wanting to beat you?" Why are they wanting? Why do they want to? Say it with me, Onision. Why do they want to? Not, what did you even fucking write? Why are they wanting to beat you up? That is some of the worst English I've ever fucking heard. Immediately, my hero complex was gaining momentum. He even says he's got a hero complex. Like, so Onision decides to go and confront these bullies. He steps out of class and he threatens them with a baseball. Not a baseball bat, a baseball. And then the bullies are just like, oh no, a baseball and an alpha chad. Oh dear, let's beat it, fellas. He goes home, David comes round to visit, he keeps making weird, inappropriate comments about his sister, who Onision reminds us that is fat. So then they go to the creek and they decide they want to shoot things with bows and arrows they've made. I just don't question it. But Onision, the good, sensible, and heroic moral figure that we all love, decides that he doesn't want to shoot living things, because that would be bad. Even though, like, 2 chapters ago, you fantasized about a bus blowing up, killing, alright, fuck it, whatever. So they decide instead to shoot a load of dead fish. They start nailing them with arrows, and then the chapter ominously finishes with the words, "The fish were not alone." Well, of course they weren't, Onision, because you're never alone when you're with God. Chapter 6. So it turns out there's a dead body in the creek. So it wasn't quite Jesus. Whoops. Onision describes it as the body of a dead woman in a skimpy pink dress. He makes it very clear that this carcass is dressed in a skimpy pink dress. You know, these are the kind of details you need. Onision gets traumatized by seeing the dead body. To be fair, an 11-year-old witnessing a dead body, that will probably mess with you a bit. But instead of dealing with this respectfully or doing something clever with it, Onision just uses it as an excuse to throw himself a pity party. Fucking grief, this man's ego is ridiculously fragile. That's the only thing I've learned from reading these books. This man's ego is fucking glass. So after a couple of pages of throwing himself a pity party, Onision then decides that he's just fine. He goes back to school and he asks Aubrey on a date. Aubrey, for some reason, is like, oh god, I'd love to, but I have to ask my parents' permission. And while this is all going down, Philip the bully is in the background being a pain in the ass. So Onision decides that it's time to go alpha Chad mode. He goes up to Philip and he just decimates him, wipes the floor with him. It's funny, you know, this kind of rings a bell. Onision portraying himself as an alpha Chad, beating the shit out of someone to impress a characterless woman. I don't know, I think I've heard this before. I can't quite put my finger on it. Onision and Philip both get called to the principal's office because, well, Onision kicked the fuck out of this guy. And as always, the principal's just like, no, it's fine, bruh. Don't worry about it. Just be good next time, don't do it again. He gets off completely scot-free, and that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 7. Warning, this is where it gets really weird. So it is announced at the beginning of this chapter that Philip has somehow fallen into the creek and died. Like, at the end of chapter 6, he was in school, he was perfectly healthy, and then suddenly, without any kind of explanation, he's just instantaneously in the creek, dead. Onision tells his friends and his family about this. Joanna, his sister, exclaims that she's too obsessed with her new boyfriend to care about it. And I don't think David even notices. I think he's just brain dead at this point. He has another fever dream about aliens, and he compares the movements of the alien to the movements of a child in his school with Tourette's. I'm not making that up. So I have in my notes, alien attacks/studies him isn't made clear because Onision can't write for shit. He then tells Alien to leave him alone. Somehow by doing this, he realises he's not dreaming, but astral projecting into space. You heard that right, folks. This book just carted off into what the fuck land. He fights off the alien like a big, massive alpha Chad hero and then spends the rest of the chapter whinging. I don't even care. Most of this book is completely pointless anyway. Chapter 8. You thought it was weird last chapter? Oh, fuck me. So this chapter opens with Onision asleep in class. He hasn't been sleeping very much because of all his weird fever dreams about the aliens. David comes up to him and is like, hey bro, why are you sleeping in class? And Onision's like, oh, I keep having weird hallucinogenic dreams about aliens. It's really distressing and upsetting. And then David's like, lol, okay bro, I don't care. Let's go play kickball. So they go and play kickball, whatever that is, and Greg uses it as an excuse to get closer to the creek because apparently there's an ominous red glow coming from it. About halfway through their game of kickball, Greg gets smacked in the face by the ball. He doesn't react, he doesn't show any kind of emotion or pain to this. He just walks off into the woods. David, quite understandably, is like, wait, what the fuck? It's about the only normal thing he does in this book. So Onision wanders through the woods for a while and finds a dead deer. And he concludes from this that the red glow he saw in the creek symbolises death. Suddenly, get this, Onision has the sixth sense to detect death. He passes out, he wakes up in the school nurse's office, he immediately goes back to the creek and finds a load more dead animals. He then ponders what could have killed all these animals, because there's no kind of wildlife in his local area that could have done it. And all this speculation and weird fucking sixth sense shit leads absolutely nowhere. It's got no impact on the plot whatsoever. 2 chapters later, it has virtually been forgotten about already. He's just such a bad writer. Chapter 9. It is now spring break, and Onision concludes that he wants to spend the whole of it locked in his room playing video games. Spring break had come. I was sitting in my room looking at my old TV. The beautiful imagery of Final Fantasy VII glowed in front of me. The characters all looked like hip young adults, something that I desired to be. How do you unironically write that and put it in a book? What the fuck? His mother then announces that she's having a friend over for dinner, but this friend is incredibly fragile, so Onision must be careful about what he says, and he must be nice to her. Onision then breaks the fourth wall, and again just stops the flow of the book. What little flow there fucking is. To explain why he's decided to include this in the book. I'm sorry, with all due respect, right? Actually, no respect at all. 90% of all your books have just been completely pointless trivia, and never once have you ever bothered to explain why you put any of it in. And yet suddenly this is where you draw the line. Now, this is a bit too absurd, guys. I better explain to my wonderful emo audience why I'm putting this in my shitty fanfiction book. So I have in my notes, Onision uses his emo I see dead people powers to conclude his mother's friend had a miscarriage and is secretly distraught about it. This then just casually comes up in conversation because people apparently talk like this, and Onion's mum recommends she goes to ER. This book is genuinely like a fever dream. Like, it's kind of ironic. Onision keeps having fever dreams in this book, and yet this entire book reads like a fever dream. So then Onision decides to try and speak to David about it. David is just like, nah bruh, I don't want to talk about any negative things at the moment. And so then Onision just fucks off and concludes, somehow, that the special ed kid earlier, do you remember the one that he compared to the movements of the alien? He concludes that he must be behind all the weird stuff that's been going on in the creek. How does he conclude this? I don't know. He just somehow knows this. Again, there is no kind of flow or plot or structure to any of these books. Just accept it. There's no point getting bogged down about it. We'll just move on. Seriously though, when you think about it, what group of people has Onision not offended yet in these books? Chapter 10. I have written in my notes, this chapter is called Your Dead Girlfriend. Whose dead girlfriend? Is it mine? Bruh, I don't have a girlfriend, let alone a dead one. Sorry, I was probably really drunk writing these notes. To be fair, how else do you expect me to get through these books? So in this chapter, Onision is now sad and lonely. He's throwing himself a pity party yet again because he and David have fallen out. He's decided for literally no reason that David is not woke enough for him because he doesn't want to talk about the sad and serious stuff that's been going on. He's also a bit awkward with Aubrey at the moment because he beat the shit out of someone right in front of her for no reason, so he then goes home and has yet another fever dream. This time the alien attacks him, pulls his eyes out, and then stabs him in the chest. Onision then wakes up from this weird fever dream, astral projection, whatever it is, and discovers that he has a very small cut on his chest. He then freaks the fuck out over this tiny cut, goes to ER, and spends ages waiting in a queue. He then complains for ages about having to wait in this queue. He feeds his little god complex for a while, and then he finally sees the doctor, who just says to him, "Nah mate, it's just a cut. It's no big deal, put a plaster on it." On the way back from the hospital, they have a car accident. They just collide with another car. Everyone's absolutely fine except the other driver's girlfriend, who's in the passenger seat. How does he know that they're boyfriend and girlfriend? Who cares? So Onision points out that this girlfriend is dead. The other driver's like, "Oh my god, my girlfriend is dead. This is so sad, guys." And then Onision and his family just get out the car and walk home. They don't call the police, they don't contact any kind of officials, they just get out of their fucked, destroyed car and just walk away from a car crash as if nothing happened. When they finally get home, he tries to talk to his stepdad about his weird fever dreams about aliens, and his stepdad's just like, "Lol, okay, I don't care." Like, sorry, with all due respect, what parent, upon hearing that their 11-year-old child is having horrible nightmares, just goes, "Lol, okay, bruh, don't care." Chapter 11. So, there's a time skip. There's actually a few time skips in this book, and Greg starts this chapter by announcing that a few months have passed, and in that time, his teacher had a heart attack in the middle of class, and Greg apparently saw his soul. Again, somewhere out of nowhere, he suddenly got the ability to see dead people and sixth sense kind of powers. I don't know, he's just jerking himself off at this point. So one night, Greg decides that he's not going to go to sleep because he keeps having weird fever dreams about aliens. His mother gets really pissed off by this, takes a belt and smacks it against his door in some weird threatening way because, you know, apparently that's going to convince him to go to sleep. She then, no joke, starts bleeding from her eyes. Suddenly his dad and sister are just there to witness this. Her eyes disintegrate and completely melt, and then just reappear, and she's perfectly fine. And from this, his family suddenly believe him about all the weird alien dreams he's been having. It's just a kind of excuse for him to go, "Haha, I told you so," to his family, and they're like, "Oh my god, of course. How didn't we believe you, Greg Rumer Onision? You're so right. You're always right. Didn't we mention that you're great?" Greg then goes back to school, and David tries to talk to him. Remember that it fell out? David basically comes back to Onision and tries to apologise, but Onision isn't ready to forgive him yet. He's still in the pandering, pity-me mode, so he screams at David to fuck off. He then hears a voice behind him, and it turns out to be the special needs kid. Remember a few chapters ago where he compared the movements of an alien to a kid with Tourette's? It's this kid. Suddenly he's behind him spouting exposition. "Nice to finally meet you with the lights on, Daniel," a voice said, coming from the corner of my right eye. Refusing to look at them, I replied, "Piss off." I could hear them chuckling under their breath. They continued, "You did the same thing to me that you did to your mum last night." I would be mad, but I did that to someone when I was younger too, so I understand. So the special ed kid then starts spewing exposition at Onision, but then almost comically he goes, "Oh wait, sorry, is this a bad time? Should I be doing this now?" And then Onision's just like, "Yeah, this is kind of bad timing. Do you mind if we do this another time?" And the special ed kid's just like, "Yeah, sure, sorry for, intruding on you. I'm really sorry. We'll do this another time, bruh. See you around," and just fucks off. Greg then pees himself with fright and covers it up by pouring his milkshake all over himself. And that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 12. So, Onision tells us out of nowhere that the special ed kid now watches him every second of the day. Onision also somehow concludes in this chapter that the aliens can't get to him in his dreams if he covers himself in metal. So he wraps himself in tinfoil and goes to sleep. Again, this entire book is just a fucking fever dream. He wraps himself in tinfoil, he goes to sleep, and instead of dreaming about aliens, he dreams about his naked teacher trying to seduce him in a field. Again, this goes nowhere. He just puts this in because I don't know, he fancies his tea. I don't fucking know. He wakes up from this dream, and the special ed kid is outside his house somehow, screaming through his window that he wants to help. And so his stepdad, in true redneck fashion, comes out of the house with a shotgun and tells him to get off his property. The roof of the house then suddenly, out of nowhere, gets ripped off and Onision is beamed up into a UFO. Stepdad starts shooting at the UFO, again, very redneck style. And then Onision just wakes up in bed as if nothing happened. But there's a hole in the roof, so it must have happened? I don't know, it's very vague. It's not deliberately vague, Onision's just terrible at writing. Onision then goes downstairs and finds his parents talking to the police. The police obviously do not believe a word of this and conclude that Onision's family is completely psychotic. I personally agree with the police. They then proclaim that they might be calling child support services. They never do. There's then another time jump. A week later, Greg is in school taking a piss, and the special ed kid appears behind him and says something along the lines of, "I have to return what was taken," and then knocks him out. Greg gets knocked out a lot in this book. Like, whenever it's convenient, whenever he needs to, like, you know, jump location or move the plot along, he just gets knocked out for the sake of convenience. It's really lazy, it's really shit, and it makes this book even more unbearable. Chapter 13. So this chapter is a flashback chapter. It takes place in the summer holidays that just finished at the start of this book. He's in Ohio with his dad, and he proclaims that he doesn't like his dad very much. A, because he was apparently inappropriate towards his mother and his sister, and B, more importantly, because he's religious. Again, just like the last book, Onision is a mega woke atheist in this book. He has to tell us quite frequently that he hates religion, and anyone that's religious is fucking stupid. You know, it is possible to like people with different opinions to you, right? He then introduces a love interest. You guessed it, it's another characterless woman. This one's called Julia. She's 15. He specifies that. She is 15 years old. That makes her 4 years older than Greg, who is 11 in this book. During this chapter, Greg conveniently falls into a pond, his clothes get soaked, and so Julia's like, bruh, come round to my house and we can dry your clothes off. And then they have sex. Just in case you forgot, Greg is 11 in this book, and Julia, this love interest, is 15. That's really, really fucked. All of the sex scenes in Onision's books are disgusting, but I just don't comprehend how he would write one that's just as bad as all the others, with an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old in it. This man has got some serious issues. Chapter 14. So this chapter is still in the flashback, I think. Onision is on the plane heading from Ohio back to Reaper's Creek, where this book starts. And for some reason, while he's on the plane, one of the flight attendants says, "Hey, why didn't you impregnate Julia? You know she's going to sleep with other people now, right?" So Onision finally gets off the plane, he's walking through the airport, and he decides, for no reason at all, to just peek through an open bathroom door. Because, you know, that's not pervy at all. And while he's peeking through, he sees in the mirror of that bathroom one of the aliens from his dream. Now, I know what you might be thinking, wait a minute, this is a flashback scene. He didn't start seeing aliens in his dream until after all of this, so why is he seeing aliens now? Well, the reason for that is because Onision is completely brain dead. He has no idea how to formulate a plot at all. So it turns out this alien he's seen in the mirror is the special ed kid that he's been mentioning for the whole book. Again, this is a flashback scene, yet somehow... oh god, I just hate this book so much. He takes a fork. He stabs this special ed / alien kid in the throat. And coincidentally, as he basically murders another human being, a flight attendant falls unconscious, and everyone pays attention to this instead of Onision gutting another human being in the throat with a fork. He then goes back home, and that night he has another fever dream. In this dream, he's on a spaceship with a guy that looks like Agent Smith with a very large head. Onision screams at this person and the skin peels off his face as a result. And so from this, Onision discovers that he has the ability to telepathically kill people. I mean, where the fuck did all this come from? Suddenly he's got sixth sense ability, suddenly he can sense dead people, and now he can telepathically murder people? He goes on a murder rampage, he kills a load of aliens, and then for some reason he concludes that the alien that he stabbed with a fork, the special ed kid, apparently he was a good guy. Why did you kill him? Chapter 15. We are now presented with another time skip. Onision is now 14 years old. Onision also announces that he now has magic powers. He can telepathically kill people, he can sense when people are gonna die. This just comes from nowhere. He's suddenly some sort of Merlin magician. Alright. Julia, for some reason, is now just in Reaper's Creek. She was in Ohio in a flashback scene, and yet for some reason now, without any explanation, she's just in Reaper's Creek and in close contact with Onision. Julia is now 18 years old, and Onision is 14, and yet they're still engaged in a very, very sexual relationship. Again, it's fucked more than I can describe. David and Onision are also friends again now. It's never explained why. They're just best mates again for no other reason than the plot, I suppose. And then finally, this chapter ends by Onision going to school, sitting in class, looking at another kid in the classroom, and just somehow knowing that he's an alien from one of his dreams. So he uses his new psychic powers and just telepathically stops him breathing. The kid then stops breathing, falls dead, and that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 16. So we're told at the start of this chapter that the reason Onision has all these magic powers is because there's a magic rock in his head. There's no build up to this, there's no logical explanation for this. He just suddenly announces and knows that there's a magic rock in his head. He also announces that a side effect of his new powers is that everybody loves him and that everything goes exactly how he wants it to go. You know, as if that didn't happen in these books anyway. David was smiling across the room from me. Two pretty teachers with cleavage showing stood by waiting for me to address them at the entrance of the room. I looked at all of them and I smiled. Something is about to change, I said. The teacher with larger breasts than anyone has ever seen replied, "What do you mean, cutie?" And click, just like that, their smiles faded. Both teachers were overcome with an expression of confusion and immediately left the room. David stood up, looked me in the eyes, lifted his finger and said, "I don't know what's going on, but I haven't liked you since elementary school. Stay away from me." He then proceeded to leave the room. This felt better. This felt like real life. What the fuck did I just read? How does any of that make any sense? At all. Onision then randomly announces that his stepdad was abusive. Remember the stepdad that he really liked, that he built a bed with, that he really seemed to get along with? Suddenly, for no reason, that stepdad is now abusive and has been kicked out of the house. Again, Onision has just got such deep-seated daddy issues that he cannot stop himself from including it in these books. Greg beams thoughts to Julia. He suddenly just has these powers for no other reason than plot convenience. She now understands the aliens, his powers, and how hard his life is. Big pity party, she still loves him. He then flies to Ohio, he can just do that now. His powers aren't explained, it's just whenever he feels convenient, he can do something. So suddenly, he can just fucking fly. So he flies all the way to Ohio, he lands on Julia's doorstep, and she comes out of the house wearing just a towel. Now I know what you're thinking, this is probably going to be followed by a really awfully written sex scene. However, we are saved from this by the fact that Julia is then randomly shot in the head. Chapter 17. So Julia is now dead, and Onision tells us that the man that killed her was wearing a funny costume. He was hired by a person who was hired by another person who was sent to employ an assassin such as him. Your inability to use English is almost impressive, Greg. I've got to give you that. Onision then randomly announces that there's loads of aliens living on Earth in disguise as humans. So suddenly he just astral projects around the planet and kills all of them in the space of about a minute. Some of these aliens are disguised as children, so he graphically describes murdering children for most of this chapter.
And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
And then, at the end of this weird murdering montage, Greg just astral projects back to where he was and decides to spare the hitman that killed Julia. Suddenly, Julia is completely fine. I mean, Onision probably resurrected her with his magic powers, but he never made that clear because he's a shitty writer. So he brings Julia back to life, and then there's an awfully written sex scene between the two of them. On page 69. To remind you, Onision is 14 in this book, and Julia is 18. So it's already paedophilia. But he just writes it as if it's fine. as if it's perfectly normal for this to happen, and that just concludes in my mind that Onision is incredibly fucked, more than we can ever possibly comprehend.
It seems to be like a taboo thing.
Onision then makes her a magic stone and puts it in her brain as well. Julia then asks him to get her pregnant, and that's the end of the chapter, basically. I think Onision just has a pregnancy fetish at this point. Chapter 18. So, this chapter opens with Onision and Julia sitting on a cloud being sappy and romantic. And after a while of this, they decide to go and visit Julia's family in their house. And as they're flying along, Onision decides to mention that Julia's underwear keep coming off. Well, I'm not sure if it's underwear or trousers, he just says pants, but either way, it's not good, is it? So they arrive in Julia's house, they just kind of land in her back garden, and Julia's dad comes out and is like, wait, why is my daughter suddenly flying, and why is she with a 14-year-old child? So he picks up an axe, like any sensible adult would, and just throws it at Onision. And then Julia's like, no, Dad, calm down, it's okay. This is Onision, he's my boyfriend. And yes, he's only 14, but that's okay, because I consent. And suddenly Julia's dad is just like, oh yeah, that's fine, sorry about that, bro, come on in, we'll have some dinner. I know I've said this for the whole of the video, but all adults in this book are stupid. In fact, no, I take that back, actually. Everyone in these books are completely stupid. While they're at dinner, Julia's dad remarks that Onision has decided to give all women's teeth vaginas in an effort to promote gender equality. In what way, shape or form does that promote gender equality? Like, how? That's just gonna piss every gender off. Onision then deduces through his magic powers that Julia's dad is actually a predator, and so using his telepathic powers just instantly kills him. There's no fight, he just kind of snaps his fingers basically, and he drops dead at the dinner table. Julia did not want me there. She understood why I did what I did, but she also just lost her father and couldn't process everything with me around. Upon realising I was not welcome, using the black rock in my skull, I materialised a dark coffin, one any family would be proud of. Seconds passed, and the coffin was complete, so I dropped it in the middle of the front room. Inside the coffin, I left enough money to more than compensate the household for the loss of its primary breadwinner. And then he just leaves. Tactful, Greg. Well done. Chapter 19. Onision tells us that he can now alter physics and reality at will with his magic powers, which makes this book even more boring and tedious than it already was. How is that interesting? Or what's that? Something's wrong? Click. Done. Solved. I mean, I know these books weren't particularly engaging anyway, but if you happen to be enjoying these because you're brain dead up until this point, you're not gonna very much anymore. Onision then goes back to his hometown and decides, for no other reason than to advance the plot, to tunnel into the ground below his hometown. And underground, he finds 14 dead prostitutes that have been buried there by a man called Gary. He then tunnels out of the earth and just arrives in his grandmother's house. This grandmother has never been mentioned before in the book, and never will be again. Grandma asks what he's doing there. He shakes his hair dry in slow motion, and it turns long and blonde. He then flies away. What was the point of this entire scene? I mean, it's a good question, like, what? Apparently, while Greg is flying away from his nana's house, he ages about 10 years in a few seconds, and his hair gets even longer and more blonde. He then tells us this isn't because of his superpowers, no, this is just a natural process. You know, this happens to all 14-year-olds. I remember when I was 14, I woke up one day and suddenly I was 24 and had really long blonde hair. I fucking wish. Onision tracks down Gary using his magical powers. He lives on a Christmas tree farm, and for some reason he's got a load of friends that he likes to kill people with. It's like a little gang of people that get together. You know, sometimes you invite friends around at the weekend to play cards or have dinner with. Well, this guy invites friends around to murder prostitutes. And even more absurdly than that, he's got pictures of them all in his house. So there's 7 of these people in total, and Onision telepathically kills 5 of them with his magic powers. Again, any kind of tension or suspense or flow is just gone now, because Onision is basically a god. He's written himself as a god. I mean, how more fucking narcissistic can you get? He questions the remaining 2. They both spew tragic backstories, but Onision just kills them anyway. He then flies away, and as he's flying away, a bright yellow light appears and sucks Onision up. You probably have so many questions about this book at this point. I do as well, and I've read them all multiple times. But these questions never get answered. Like, there's no point beating yourself up over them. You'll only cause yourself mental problems if you continue to question this book. So just accept it, we'll get through it. Hopefully our brains won't leak out of our ears. Chapter 20. So, do you remember how I've been describing this book as a lucid fever dream? Well, that doesn't quite cover how absurd it is from this point on. So it turns out that this bright yellow light is God. And God is in the shape of a steampunk skull who he calls the Reaper. Onision's been shitting on God and religion for the whole of these books. He's made it very clear multiple times that it's not real and anyone that believes in it is a complete dumbass. But suddenly God is real? Okay, admittedly it's not a conventional God, but he's just confirmed in his book that God is real. You've just undermined all of your woke atheist shit. Greg questions this god, the Reaper, whatever he's called, and so the Reaper just rips him in half. However, Onision is a super powerful Chad, and so he's perfectly fine. He reads the Reaper's mind, decides he's a bad person, and you guessed it, kills him in an instant. Altering the code, whatever that is, I surrounded the creature and his screams with a grey material I designed myself in a matter of seconds. I created it to contain any force, including death itself. I bound the creature controlling the mass with my mind, and as the grey material fully enclosed around this Reaper, I crushed him to the size of a child's marble. Onision, because he's a super powerful Chad, could not possibly get injured or deprimented in any way, so he just fixes himself and then clones himself. So there are now two Onisions, two identical Onisions. One wasn't bad enough. And they both conclude somehow that there are actually 3 other gods in 3 other locations. So he sends his clone off to kill this first god, and in the meantime he visits Julia briefly. Julia proclaims, get this, that Onision might be a bit too old for him now. So she was fine dating a 14-year-old, but she's not fine dating a 24-year-old. Okay, so she's basically a pedo. The Onision clone, who he just refers to as the body, announces that he's killed the first god, so there's now only 2 left. And so the 2 identical dumbasses head off into wherever to go and find and kill these last remaining gods. Do you remember the beginning of this book? Do you remember, like, Philip the Bully? Do you remember when, you know, he'd just come home from Ohio or whatever? Chapter 21. In an instant, I was already where I needed to be. Location coding is rather simple. I just didn't want to take my time travelling. I now stood behind a man who looked like what most anyone would imagine God to be. It's incredible that Onision's grasp of language has gotten worse over the course of this book. So the 2 Gregs kill the god. It's really boring. It takes like less than a page because, you know, they're 2 alpha chads and they couldn't possibly struggle at anything because that would mean they're weak. Onision then for some reason collapses, exhausted apparently by this very easy battle, and so his clone, the body, carries him away. The rest of this chapter is just pointless exposition really. He gets a bit homo about his own clone. He then spews a load of sci-fi jargon in an attempt to explain all of his magical powers. And then he starts trying to debunk a load of Bible stuff, because, you know, he's mentioned gods, but he's a mega woke atheist, so it's really boring. I really don't care about it, do you? Chapter 22. So, Onision and his weird clone fly away to kill the 3rd and final god. They do, of course, kill this 3rd and final god, but just before they do, he mentions that he's also got a sister and a father named Cull, so there's now even more weird gods for Greg to destroy heroically. Turns out Cull is an old dude sitting on a throne. He starts crying when he sees Greg. I mean, to be fair, who doesn't? Onision then spews a load of exposition about how these gods and how humans came to be. It's basically his own weird version of a creation myth. It's cultish as fuck. It's really boring. It's the most poorly written section in this entire book, so for the sake of your remaining brain cells, let's just skip over it, shall we? After modifying the universe to my will, I turned around to Cull and lifted my arm. As my arm raised, the walls around us transitioned to show God's code instead of Cull's fallen daughters. Cull's eyes widened as he silently watched the world around him shift. I spoke aloud. You won't need to remember your daughter anymore, Cull. She's standing next to you. Cull's stare became weak. His head began to dip forward, and he collapsed in his chair. He could feel his daughter coming back to his reality as she was, just how he remembered her. This woman was beyond description. I had seen no one like her before. The moment she gained her consciousness again, she immediately went to aid her father. Seeing them reunited, knowing their troubles were mostly behind them, I felt confident in the future they would influence without God to end what the world was, or his own sister once more. It was time for me to go home. I've read this section several times, honestly. and I don't understand what any of it means. Basically, I think, in true Alpha Chad fashion, he saves and redeems Cull, brings his daughter back to him, and then just fucks off. Who cares? The book's nearly over at this point. Chapter 23. Onision returns to his home in Reaper's Creek and immediately gets disowned by his family. I wonder if that happens very much. He's not disowned over the fact that he aged 10 years in several seconds. He's not disowned over the fact that he's been on several genocidal sprees at this point. He's disowned over his mother's eyes disappearing and reappearing. Do you remember that happened several chapters ago? For some reason his family was perfectly fine with it when it happens, but now, several years after it happened, they're just like, no, this is bad. It must be Onision's fault. Let's disown him. So Onision is now only loved by Julia, his characterless love interest, and his weird, slightly homoerotic clone. Julia then tells us that she totally forgives Onision for killing her father in a split second, and then there's another horribly written sex scene. The next day he wakes up with Julia and the world is some sort of Garden of Eden now. He's literally proclaimed himself as a god and righted all the wrongs in the world. I know. His ego's fucking massive. Greg and his clone then fly away and find more of these aliens. Do you remember the aliens from ages ago in this book? Suddenly they're back. They create a translator to discover what they've been saying all this time. Turns out they're all good guys. Turns out they weren't bad at all. It was all the fault of those three gods that Onision and his clone just killed. Just to remind you, Onision spent this entire book killing these aliens on sight. Like, do you remember that bit where he teleported around the world, just mass murdering them? He committed genocide against these aliens, and now he proclaims that they're totally innocent. So Onision then just wipes all their minds so they'll never come after him and disappears. It's never mentioned again. You know, Onision could obviously never be criticised, even though he's just told us that he committed genocide. But oh well, what? Who cares? Finally, in this chapter, we learn that the magic stone in Onision's mind was created by God's sister, who, by pure coincidence, happens to be his mother. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Onision has literally just written himself as a god. I mean, I know he's been basically calling himself a god for half of this book now. In fact, he's been calling himself a god for most of these books. But he's now actually literally gone, yes, I am the son of a goddess. I mean, I hate this man so much. I hate this man so much. How fragile is your ego that you have to write a book in which you are the son of a goddess? Again, there's another really weird last-minute twist at the end of this book. In Stones to Abbigale, it's that the school nurse was an arsonist. In This Is Why I Hate You, it was that his dad was abusive. And in this book, it's that he's a literal god. So that's apparently supposed to explain everything that's happened in this book. It really doesn't, does it? Chapter 24, the final chapter of this book, you'll be pleased to know. Much like every final chapter of Onision's books, he just spends it jerking himself off for a few pages and then the book just abruptly ends. He proclaims that his new utopia is amazing, Julia wants to be impregnated by him, and then he just spends the rest of the chapter telling us how amazing and great and wonderful he is. And that's the end of the book. It just finishes there. I hadn't bothered to visit my family that brought me into human form 20 years ago. I felt like they were still better off without me. The same goes with my school friend David. Do you remember him? He hasn't been mentioned for like over half of this book. And even the house near the creek where I grew up. That was all a past I didn't want in my future. And I was certain with our new god, they were all happy anyway. Just like the new god of Earth instructed me, I didn't physically alter the code of her planet or the people on it whatsoever. But I didn't need to, as my original mother was perfect. And no matter how much I evolved, she would still be wiser than me. That's it. That's the end of the book. It just finishes there. Completely randomly. Almost mid-sentence. What the fuck is this book? So yeah, that is it. That is the end of the book. Thank God. My final verdict is worst book of the lot. The whole thing read like a perverted night terror. 0.5 out of 10. Please don't ever go near this. Burn it all away from my mind. So there we go. That is all three of Onision's awful books written. Here are the final scores for all three books on the screen. If you want my final verdict, of all the three books, Reaper's Creek, the third book, was definitely the worst objectively. Like the story, the writing, the grammar, all of that was objectively the worst. However, personally, I hated book 2 the most. Because while Reaper's Creek was really fucking strange, it was so absurd that it almost made it easier to read. So you could just skim through it and laugh along at it, I suppose. Book 2 wasn't quite absurd enough to be easy to read, but it was still absurd enough to make you want to claw your own eyes out. So Book 2 was the worst for me, but book 3 was the worst overall. Don't go near any of them, to be honest. Just don't. So, what have we learned from this experience? To be honest, absolutely nothing. We knew Onision was an awful person. We knew he had no talent. We knew he couldn't write for shit. The only thing this experience has done is taken several years off my life.
Greg Groomer Onision, after reviewing the evidence of your trial, I find this case to be one of the most deplorable I have ever witnessed. By the power invested in me by the Royal Stock Image Courtroom, I find you guilty of crimes against literature.
Wow. Wow!
Silence. I sentence you to the prisons of Dimension 764. May you think long and hard on never writing books again. Take this man away.
So to the 5 or so of you still watching this video, thanks very much for sticking the whole way through. It does mean a lot to me, massively appreciated. I've been working on this video for a few months in the background now, and I'm really proud with how it turned out, so any support you want to throw it, or my deranged little YouTube channel in general, is massively appreciated. A like, a subscribe, a share, whatever you feel like doing, just know that I'm very grateful for it, and it does help out quite a lot. I'll be perfectly honest, I do not have an outro for this video scripted at all. My priority was just getting through those 3 books. I've got nothing, to be honest. Thanks very much for watching. Stay safe. May you have a blessed and holy existence, and I'll see you all in the next hecking video.